This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. The following Care Lab podcast does not provide health or medical advice. All content is provided for information purposes only. Listeners are encouraged to speak with their healthcare provider for specific healthcare advice and are wholly responsible for the outcome of implementing any tips or information presented.
Hey everyone, welcome to Care Lab.
Hi, it's Care Lab. I'm so glad to see you guys.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great this morning. I'm so happy that you're here with us today, Lisa. Before we dive into anything, I want to let folks know how great you are, and how excited we are to have you here today. So, real quick introduction. So, Lisa's worked in the field of aging and elder care for over 40 years, which you cannot tell from her skin, which is flawless. I'll just go ahead and say, she's worked in a wide variety of settings, and her special interest is in trauma-informed care, grief, and living well with chronic illness. And she's really a champion of person-centered care and trauma-informed care. Lisa is so awesome. You're going to see why, because she's going to make you feel all warm and fuzzy. She is absolutely magnificent at helping other people channel their innate wisdom to help make good decisions for themselves. So anyway, Lisa, welcome to Care Lab. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me here today. It's really exciting for me to be here.
So before we get started, I have a quick question for you both. So Fridays, and Fridays are usually our recording days, but so Fridays, they're either like, I think people fall into two categories. People either buckle down and like get work done on Fridays because maybe they don't have as many meetings scheduled or something like that, or they're like, whatever, I'm checking my email twice today, and other than that, the weekend has begun. Which category do you fall into?
It's a great question because my Fridays for months and months have been like work. And today, after we're done with our chat, I think we may actually go see a movie and just be like,
Yes.
ah. So
That sounds wonderful.
it's going to be a day off today.
That's good. That's so good. It's so important to find that time when you can.
Absolutely. I would say that Fridays are work because I want Saturday to not be work.
Mhm.
So I use my babysitting hours very wisely. So I try hard to get all the work done so that then I can not work so much when they're around.
Friday is also a work day for me too. I had this notion once that I would take Fridays and I would work a little bit less so that I could kind of do like things around the house to get house in order for the weekend, so I don't spend my whole weekend,
Cleaning the
doing.
house.
Yes, exactly, because that's not that much. That's not a weekend. Just FYI.
Listen, I understand.
But yeah, so that notion has gone out the window. Mostly I just work. But here's the thing. My thing is on Friday afternoons, right when I'm supposed to go pick up my kids, that's when I have my best ideas. And I'm like, dang,
Time to go.
So then I end up like back on my computer at some point, like tapping away and working till late. But such is life.
You have to catch those ideas when you have them, though, right?
Yes, because the creative juices are not always flowing, or sometimes like you're just not always in the right motivational state to get things done. I wish that happened to me on Monday mornings, but
Never seems to line up quite right, huh?
no, not really. Monday mornings, I'm just trying to, make it just like everybody else.
Just trying to make it.
So should we jump right in here? We have a really kind of juicy topic to talk about with you today, Lisa, and that is boundaries in caregiving. It's something that is talked about a lot, but I think a lot of folks really struggle with. Maybe we could start by just a quick discussion of like what is it what do boundaries even mean in this context?
Yeah, I've heard for years that, caregivers need to set boundaries, set healthy boundaries. And nobody ever really explained exactly what a boundary is or how they work or how to set them. So I really started to dive deep into this, especially when I had my therapy practice. So because it's such a big issue, right? So a boundary isn't just a wall. And people think of a boundary as a fixed limit to something, something sort of permanent that keeps things out, right? I think that's often what we think of when we think of a boundary. But I heard this wonderful metaphor one time about boundaries that need to be flexible, that they open up and they close maybe multiple times a day.
Mm.
And that when they open and close, that's both to keep some things out, but also then to keep something in. There's always something that if you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else, right? Excuse me. So boundaries need to be flexible. And the example I give for this is, say you wake up Monday morning, right? And before you're really ready to see other people or jump right into work, maybe you're the kind of person who needs a cup of coffee. You just can't face the day without that coffee. So you may not even be aware that you set a boundary on your day or on that time, right? You don't maybe even get dressed yet. Maybe you don't answer your phone for a while. Maybe you don't unlock your door. Those are all boundaries that allow you the space and time to sort of gather your energy, get your caffeine, pull yourself together. You're saying yes to that time to yourself, but you're saying no to the public. And then when you're ready, and for those who are listening, I'm sort of putting my arms up in front of me. I think of this as like a ballet move, right? So you're making a circle with your arms. And when you're ready, you open that circle up and you're ready. It's like, welcome day, welcome people. You
Mm-hmm.
can come on in now. You may unlock your door. You may turn the ringer back on your phone. You've had your shower, you're dressed. So there's a different kind of boundary, but now it's open. Later on in the day, you might need to get some work done. You need to even take a nap, close your eyes for a few minutes. The boundary can close again. Lock the door, close the drapes. If you're taking a nap, pull the blanket up over your shoulders. Whatever you need to do to get that, it's a form of self-care, right? To set that boundary, to keep other folks out, keep other demands, questions, demands on your time, energy, and whatever out so that you can take care of yourself. The taking care of yourself goes two ways because sometimes we're opening ourselves to friendship, to love, to help. So the point I just want to make about boundaries is it's not a fixed wall, and we open it when it needs to be open to let something in, and we can close it to keep something out and to protect something. So that's sort of a quickie way that I think about boundaries. And we get into trouble if we keep our boundaries closed too long or open too long when they really should be closed. And we can talk more about that.
That's such an
Yes.
interesting definition to me because I would have never called it that. And I would be the person that says, like, I understand what boundaries I have to have, and this is the wall I draw at this thing or at this decision. But what you're describing is much more like what the scientist in my brain says, like the blood-brain barrier, right? And so, like, there's this thing that goes around your brain because, of course, your brain is the most important thing in your body to protect, right? And so, even though you got an immune system and you got all this other stuff going on, there's a special layer around your brain that only lets certain stuff come into your brain space, and it keeps basically everything else out. But it's not a wall. It's not the skull. It's it's a membrane that does let some things in. That's why some medications work, because they come in a way that your blood-brain barrier allows for it to come in, and then it impacts your brain, and it keeps all the other stuff out. And like, if it didn't do both ways, it wouldn't work.
It's a beautiful way to think about it, Brandy, and I love that. I have a scientific approach to this too, and we know that if that blood-brain barrier is damaged in some way, we have bad consequences, right?
Yeah.
So if the nutrients aren't getting through, if the medication isn't getting through, what's on the inside can get really sick. Or if the blood is coming through that barrier, then parts of the brain can die, right? So I like the way you've described it. We're talking about permeability. So we can think of the boundaries as open or closed, or we can think of them as too rigid or too soft. If that makes sense. Depends on, pick your analogy. And I like that one.
Yeah, I think I won't. I was thinking of like a heart valve, like opening and closing, like it's open or closed, and you don't want any backwash going in there, right? And like there's a finite amount of blood that can go through, but we want just the right amount to get in and just the right amount to get out, and like that's the purpose of the valve. Kind of yeah, similar thing. I like thinking of boundaries in these ways, and I had not thought of that before, because yeah, same as Brandy, I was like, okay, here's the line, and this is what I don't cross over. But maybe not having flexibilities in those boundaries doesn't allow us the flexibility that is required of life, which is a changing process to change what we need or change what we do based on the circumstances around us. So it's a much more helpful definition of boundaries to think of them as flexible or like hard versus soft. I think that's what a unique way of thinking about it. What are some of the what are the risks of having a boundary that is too firm that you have kind of seen throughout your life and your practice?
Yeah, so especially when we're thinking about giving care or sharing care with someone, that rigid boundary might be when a person feels like everything has to be done by them. Like they're the only one who can take mom to the grocery store. They're the only one who can clean mom's house because mom's told her, you're the only one who can clean my house. I like how you do it. So, which brings up another important thing about boundaries is families have different kinds of expectations and approaches about boundaries. And depending on the family you grew up in, your own boundaries may not have been honored or reinforced or respected. So a lot of us grew up feeling like other people's needs were the things that we needed to attend to, and it didn't matter what we needed. We just needed to make sure they were okay. And here we're talking about anything from, big social, cultural expectations, especially it seems like depending on the generation you came from, on women, like, right, it's the woman's job to take care of everybody in the household. Doesn't matter if you're only 5, that's still your job. To very personal things that may be happening in some families where trauma or role changes, divorce in the family, separation, maybe even mental health issues or addiction, can really mess with people's boundaries and what you feel like your role is. So before we even can talk about boundaries, we have to talk about like how do you think about that and what's important to you? Like you can't set a boundary. You don't know what to say no to or what to say yes to unless you know in a really clear way what your needs are. And I've been doing a lot of recent exploration about this. I have a colleague, her name is Rebecca Hubbard. She's a brilliant social worker in Chicago. Colorado. And we've been doing some teaching together. And she is teaching me so much about nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's also known as compassionate communication. And I'm realizing every time I talk to her how really important these tools are, not just for communicating what your needs are and helping you understand what other people's underlying needs are, but also in setting boundaries and learning how to make those decisions about what your values are.
Hey there, it's Amelia. Listen, I am so thrilled to have a great resource like Ask Sammy as part of the Care Lab team, and here's why. It's a game changer for aging in place because it makes it so simple. All you do is ask. Just type in your question or even tell Sammy what the problem is and get tailored solutions. Everything from innovative adaptive equipment to comprehensive resources. It's a great way to become more empowered, to live more independently, and to live with greater confidence. And my favorite thing about how Ask Sammy works is it's deeply rooted in dignity and practicality. So whether you're a fellow therapist, a care partner, or someone who's seeking solutions for themselves, visit www.asksammy.com. We're going to link it in the show notes so you can find it there. Start making home more accessible today. Now, back to the show.
So it's been like an ongoing journey for me, this whole issue of boundaries. It's not so simple as like knowing how to say no. It's also about knowing what you value and why that's important, and if what you value is taking care of other people, even if it's making you really, really sick, or if it's bankrupting you. Let me give you an example. Um, Imagine the person, and this does happen, whose boundaries are so wide open or so soft that when a parent says, I'm going to spend money and I'm going to spend your money, and it doesn't matter that you can't pay your own mortgage, I'm going to take your credit card and I'm going to spend money. And that person who is a caregiver can't say no, then that needs to be looked at, right? Because real harm is happening there. So those are the things that I get involved with because of my work with support groups or my work with psychotherapy. So, we're really running into some pretty significant situations.
I think that something else that I had never really thought about, at least not at the top of my brain, like maybe it was buried down somewhere there, but is this fact that a lot of times when we're talking about caregivers and setting boundaries, we're acting as if there's no background or history to that person before they became a caregiver, right? When of course we are all fully formed or forming, always in the process of forming human beings, starting from the moment that we're born. And so these experiences that people have, I think childhood is, it just molds you, right? And we don't necessarily begin to sort out how our childhood has influenced us until we're a lot further along in our journey as adults a lot of the time. But do you find in a lot of your work with the caregivers who are like actively caring for folks now as adults that they're having to go back into their childhood and think about, what did I learn about boundaries as a child? How do I even know what my values are? And like really get down into work about things that happened so much earlier in their life before they ever became a caregiver to sort out their needs now.
Yeah, Amelia, for sure. In my work as a psychotherapist, it really does go back to those early messages that we get about who we are and what we're supposed to do in the family, and they're not always necessarily factual messages, because kids see the world through their own egocentric lens, and by that I don't mean egotistical, but kids understand the world as revolving around them. That's developmentally appropriate for them. So a kid who has a parent leave the home because they don't get along with the other parent might believe that they left because of something they did So they take that on and may say, well, I have to be super good because maybe the other parent is going to leave, and that would be devastating for me. How can I can't even reach the first cupboard, so I'll die. Literally, it's a life and death issue if you're a child, if we can't keep that connection with the adults that are around us. So taking that on and we keep it though in the back of our head. So sometimes that taking care of others, whether it's because we're going to be the best little boy or girl that we can be, um, is something that feels like a survival skill. And that's all happening at a really subconscious kind of a level. I didn't mean to get all psychoanalytic on you,
No,
but
this
yeah,
is great. I
Yeah,
think people are
exactly.
going to listen to this and really start thinking about what you're saying here. This is fantastic.
yeah. And the good news is that we absolutely have ways to support people in looking at that and in healing from things that are not serving them well, those roles and those beliefs, and coming into a better balance in their care partner relationships. Finding not just the inner sense of who they are and what they truly need, but also finding that in a way that really feels empowering and comfortable. I'm a big fan of therapy, obviously, but finding a way to do that that isn't coming from that place of true hurt and anger, which obviously and rightfully exists, but being able to approach an elder, even someone who may have been abusive or neglectful at some point in that person's life, or may still be, but being able to approach them, one human being to another, and saying, here are the things that I need. I understand that you have some needs too. I can do A and B. Let's work together to figure out how you can have these other needs met, things that I can't do for you. And, just having that support of somebody that's in your corner, whether that's a therapist or a person from your faith community or a very wise friend, somebody who can be in your corner and can help you sort that stuff out.
I think that's so
Yeah.
important that you brought that up because that's what I was thinking too. It was about like there's the dynamic of who you are as a person that started from being a kid and how that impacts your caregiving and boundaries. But then there's also the impact of who they are to you and what has happened in the past. And while you might feel responsible for caring for them, um, that doesn't mean that they're a blank slate and you're a blank slate. You have baggage together, and maybe that's abuse, like you said, or maybe it's less serious than that, but it's still impactful. And so I think the very clear cut way you just said, like, hey, I can do A and B for you, but I also know that C and D need to get done. Let's talk about how we can find that, how to get that done, because that's that's not something I can do for you.
Yeah.
And leaving it just like that, I think is very it sounds very easy, but I think that's a big problem that people end up having and they don't talk about it, and so they don't see that it could actually be easy. It just needs to be talked about.
Yeah, it's not necessarily easy. I often think about elder care as both an art and a science.
Mhm.
And we're not just talking about elder care, right? We're talking about your whole life, potentially, the lives that your siblings have experienced, which I guarantee are different from yours because we all grow up in a different family. I'm the oldest of four girls. I didn't have any older brothers and sisters. So for a while, I was an only child. The next younger sister had a very different family than I did and different relationship with our parents,
Mhm.
and so on. And did we all take on different roles depending on those relationships?
Mhm.
And then the parent themselves, and Brandy, you bring this up and you say it so beautifully, they have their baggage from even before you were born, plus, they might have been 20 something when they had you, and now they're 80 and they're a different person than they were when the things that were happening that you felt hurt by
Mhm.
happened.
Mhm.
And they may be aware of it, they may not be aware of it. I mean, it's very unique and it's very specific to each family. And I do want to say it's really common. I mean, one of the things that's really influenced my career, it's part of the teaching that I do now on trauma-informed care, is something called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And it started out with about 17,000 people, which is huge for a study, out at Kaiser Permanente in California. And they were joined by the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. So the CDC and Kaiser Permanente looked at all these people, and what they learned was the more experiences you have as a child, like before age 18, and they included three major areas like abuse, neglect, and family structure. So, was there a parent who was incarcerated, or was there divorce in the family? I think I have those categories right. And if you get like 1 point for each of those things that happened. If the parent was treated violently, or if you experienced physical or emotional abuse or sexual abuse. So when those things happen, you get a score. And what they learned was the higher you scored as in these events as a child, the more likely you were. There was a direct correlation between that and how many and how ill you were by midlife. Like in your 50s, you were more likely to have cancer, COPD, obesity, asthma, heart disease. I mean,
Wow.
that blew me away because as a clinical gerontologist as well as a social worker, I know that if you have chronic illness in your 50s, that does not bode well overall for the next 20 years of your life. Those are the folks that are going to need assistance, right? Whether it's from family or from some kind of residential care.
Yeah.
If you're healthy till your 70s, you get the bonus round. You get another 20 years of good living, usually in your own home, and you're doing pretty well. So you get to be 90 then, and not necessarily need too much help. So that blew me away. And again, it's important to know that these adverse childhood incidents were more common than anybody realized, and they cross all socioeconomic statuses. They are more common, and what we're learning about how the brain works is teaching us how we can support healing. Most of those efforts are geared towards kids because we want to prevent illness. We want to prevent the toxic stress, which leads to inflammation, which leads to illness. We want to help people learn how to do mindful awareness and these simple things. Like, that's why we're doing yoga in some schools now, because these really help. But I work with older people, so my passion is really supporting healing in the second half of life, whether that's a caregiver or the older person that they're taking care of. We can support healing in the later half of life and improve health and well-being.
Care Lab listeners, it's Brandy, and as the founder of a platform made to make aging in place easier for everyone, I knew it would be incomplete if we did not have education, especially for caregivers. So whether you're a family caregiver or somebody who trains a whole organization, Higher Standards Caregiver Training videos are for you. I'm so proud that we were able to partner together with Amelia in order to provide these to you because they're easy for everybody. You get great occupational therapist-led training on topics like transfers and how to care for someone as they age, or maybe as things change when you have Parkinson's. So no matter if you're the loved one who doesn't know exactly what to do next because things are getting different, or if you're a professional who trains caregivers that go into the community and you need some quality education, you get both from Higher Standards Caregiver Training. And you need to check them out at higherstandardscaregivertraining.com.
I think that's such an important point to make because I think culturally there's this idea that you become an adult and you're fixed and that's how it is, or you can't change anymore, you're not going to learn anything else, or you get older and you're just going to decline and that's how it is and there's nothing that you can do about it. And I have found through my own life and my own clinical practice that absolutely that nothing could be further from the truth, that we still have the capacity to improve and learn and change if we want to as we get older. So even though this stuff may have happened before, we can still do the work to make improvements, and those improvements can matter. It matters.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Absolutely. I'm with you 100%, Amelia. I am a follower of Dr. Bill Thomas. He is a global speaker on the whole issue of elderhood and an anti-ageism speaker, and he's written some brilliant books on this topic. And he talks about elderhood as a distinct age of life and the developmental stage where growth continues, and that there are distinct tasks developmentally of that stage of life. And we can talk about, like, when does that start? Human beings are so diverse. By the time they, as we age, we're more different than we are alike. But it's a fascinating way to think about it, and it goes against that what he calls the declinist view of aging. It's not just about decline alone. There's brilliant growth that happens in that stage of life, and it's honestly, it's exciting. And for me, it makes it all the more important and almost urgent for people, because I think if you look at that stage of life and what the tasks are, if you look at Erickson's 8 stages of development, he talks about the final stage being integrity versus despair. We naturally do life review at that stage of life, and we want to know, hey, was I here for a reason? Did my life have purpose? Does it make sense? If it doesn't make sense, I have sat with people who just are in despair at the end of their life, and they struggle. It is a horrible way to end your life. But if you can look back on your life, and sometimes you need support to do that, and say, yeah, I made some crazy mistakes, and this is what happened, but here's what I learned. It does hold together. Then I think you're ready to go on to whatever you believe the next stage might be, whether that's just the end of a life well lived or you believe there's something after this one.
So we obviously, our focus on Care Lab is we think about caregivers and the caregiving experience, but I think what you're talking about is equally relevant to people who are receiving that care, to the other half of the care partner equation, because if you are receiving care, you still have a past life. You've got all that baggage. You have your own boundaries that affect the care that you may or may not receive. You're maybe even more actively in that life review process, right? Do you work with a lot of folks on the other side of the care equation who are receiving care in the care partnership too?
Yeah, I throughout my career I did. I'm retired from my private therapy practice right now, but that I have always focused on sort of that two that double-pronged thing. I always worked with caregivers, excuse me, but then also with people who were older themselves and were receiving care. And it's so interesting you ask that, because for like decades they felt like two different jobs. And this concept that I talk about of care partnership, which comes from the Eden Alternative, which Dr. Bill Thomas co-founded, brings those two things together and talks about how they describe or define care as anyone or anything that helps another to grow. So when we think about care that way, we're not just talking about treatment or care of the body alone. We're really talking about learning from each other. And it means that not just elders or somebody who's accepting care, doesn't have to be an older person chronologically, but anybody who's accepting care from us is receiving it, or that the caregivers just are pouring out the care. That's how people get their boundaries out of whack, right? That's how caregivers end up feeling depleted. And it's how people who are receiving care are like inundated and they don't have opportunities to give back. And for years, I heard caregivers on one side of the equation saying, I'm so exhausted, all I do is give, give, give. And I heard elders saying, I'm so bored, I'm lonely, I'm helpless, the 3 plagues of the Eden Alternative, and nobody will let me do anything, and I have no worth anymore. And when you bring those ideas together and you talk about care in this different way, you recognize the potential for care partnership.
Yeah.
And care partners then, it instantly changes everything. Care partners can learn and grow from each other. And it means that anyone, no matter what apparent limitations they may have, has something to teach you. You have something to learn from that person. And it's a beautiful way to shift the dynamic and even the playing field. So yeah, I love working on both sides of that fence for sure.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting to hear it come from you from that way, because that's the same thing that I feel like I've experienced in my career too, is that, as an OT, it's our job to help people be as independent as possible doing their everyday things. And so we have very intimate conversations about what is it that you want to be able to do, and let me help you do that. And so when I'm talking with the individual, they're saying exactly what you said, which is, I want to be able to do X, Y, or Z. Nobody's letting me do anything. I'm safe. I can go to the bathroom on my own, or whatever the thing is. And on the other hand, or sometimes like behind them, but in my line of sight, the care partner is back there like, no, they can't do that. I don't want them to do this. Don't let them do that. It's unsafe. And like, there's such a dichotomy there, but they're supposed to be working together. And even just the simple shift of the language from caregiving to care partnership is really important. And because when you get the language right, it guides the rest of the thing. And so if we think about it as being partners and working together, then maybe we can say, okay, you're not safe getting up and walking to the bathroom on your own. But once I get you in there, I can definitely shut the door and let you do whatever. And then just holler for me when you're ready for me, instead of me standing over you or like having a bird's eye view. I mean, staring at you the whole time you're trying to do it, as an example. And now we're working together to get the job done instead of, and we both feel happy about that, because one
Yeah.
person gets some independence and the other person gets some sense of safety.
Yeah, it's all about empowering both sides of the equation so that everyone feels honored and respected and has dignity, and no one feels overwhelmed one way or the other.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Michael, I had a question for you, which was, you made this great point about if you don't know what your value system is or what you have, it's hard to set boundaries. But the majority of people that I meet that become care partners don't plan to do it. And all of a sudden they're care partners. So maybe they've never even thought about what their boundaries should be or shouldn't be, or what their values are. And do you have any suggestions about how to stop and think about that? How much time it takes to stop and think about that? How do they get started on doing that?
Yeah. I did an exercise several years ago. Sorry, it's allergy season in the Northeast. So um, I found an online tool, and I haven't looked like in the last couple of months, but I'm sure it's still there. If you just Google um, Franklin Covey, Covey, personal mission statement builder, you will find a tool online that will help you actually create a mission statement for yourself. I think most of us are aware of how organizations might have a mission statement, but this is a way to think about who you are, like what's important to you, who are your heroes, who do you admire, how do you want to be remembered. And I first did this for myself, oh my gosh, way back right before the turn of when you say the last century and you're my age, you're thinking 1900, but right around 2000, I did this for myself. And it's a powerful document that comes out of that thinking process. They ask you questions, you answer them, and then it'll actually like print out for you a document that you can tweak and change. You can revisit, because these things change for you over time as your relationships change or you go into different stages of life. But I would start with like a personal mission statement. It helps you think about what's important to you.
Hmm.
I think that's a good way to start. And it's kind of a fun thing to do, and it makes you think. It makes you talk to the people that you care about, what's important. How do you want to be remembered? An exercise I did many years before that was similar. It was one of the first aging studies courses that I ever took. It was a death and dying course. That's another big. I'm a big fan of grief studies. Sounds bizarre, doesn't it?
You know what? My favorite
But
lab in school was Cadaver Lab. So
oh yeah,
I know people think
well,
I'm
I'm
real
going.
weird for that, but
No, that's okay. We get it. We get people like that. That's okay. Was writing your own obituary. Like, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want people to remember about your life? That will give you a clue about what's important to you.
It's like
Yeah.
working. It's like working backwards. Like what's the end, and then how do I get to that, right? And so if I want people to remember me for X, Y, and Z, what should I be doing now in order to continue that? And that can really put it into perspective, I think.
Yeah. Something that's more immediate is something I talk about in the course that I have up on the Whole Care Network University, and it's about juggling balls. And what they say is that um, even the best juggler in the world can really only juggle so many items. If you throw more items at that, they're going to start dropping stuff, and they can't control what they're going to drop. So we have to imagine that some of the balls that we juggle are crystal and some of them are rubber. And when we drop crystal balls, they will shatter, and there's nothing we can do about that. If we drop a rubber ball, no big deal. The ball is going to bounce, it'll roll off into the corner. We can leave it there. Maybe it'll get dusty, but we can always go retrieve it, or we can toss it to somebody else to watch for a while. Care partners, if they think about what is rubber and what is crystal, and in my course I have a worksheet for them to do that, they can kind of realize, hey, I'm juggling too many balls. Maybe I need to delegate. Not an easy skill if you haven't been taught how to do that, but I need to get rid of some of these balls. Which things am I juggling are really precious that I just can't risk dropping? And which things are something that I can pass off for a little while or set aside for right now?
Mm.
And it might get down to really simple things. I mean, talking about boundaries, we might be in the habit of just saying yes when folks ask us to give our time. We think about resources as money, but time, energy, our emotional energy, these are all different kinds of resources, and we might only have limited amounts of each. We only have limited amounts of each to spend.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're involved in caregiving, that is taking up a certain amount of our time, energy, maybe even our money. And so we're juggling that now as a ball or a couple of balls. What are the other things that we now have to say no to? Maybe every year I volunteered for some charity, or I helped with some event, and maybe this year I have to set a boundary on that, and I have to say no to that, and that's where those good communication skills come in.
Mm-hmm.
well, Lisa, I think I want to be respectful. I could honestly listen, everyone. I could talk to Lisa Kendall forever because I think you're so amazing, and I learn so much from you every time we have a conversation.
Aw.
You are an absolute fountain of knowledge and experience and wisdom, and so I really thank you for being here on this episode of Care Lab Podcast today. I want to be respectful of your time, though. I do also want to just say one more time, y'all, I think everyone knows why I love you so much. Check out Lisa's course at Whole Care Network University. It's wcnuniversity.com. You can search for Lisa Kendall there, and her course or courses will pop right up. And you can see why they are so incredibly valuable, because Lisa herself is a diamond. Amazing. She's one in a million. So thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your knowledge and experience with us.
Thank you both. I really love that you invited me, and I enjoy talking with both of you. As you can tell, I'm passionate about these topics, and I could keep talking for like ever.
Well,
So
we'd love to have you back again to kind of dig deeper into some other topics for sure. So, listen, you name the time and the day. We'll be there for you, Lisa.
well, thank you. I'm here, and I look forward to talking with you both again, and to your audience. So thank you very
Well, I
much.
hope that you enjoy your movie this afternoon and taking your Friday off. Care Lab podcast listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure that you are subscribing to the podcast, share it with folks who could benefit from it, like and follow us. That way you're making sure that you get notified as soon as a new episode drops. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time at the Care Lab.
See ya.
Bye.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.